Melanie is a valued colleague, and I greatly appreciate her support and leadership to make this event happen. Before I give the floor to Alison for land acknowledgement, I would like to thank a few people who helped us to make this event happen. First, my friend Dr. Arne Kislenko, who is traveling today, but he provided access to this beautiful room. And also I would like to thank Alison, Stephen, Joy, Hoda, and also Rashid for helping us during today's event. Before I forget, if you're not yet a member of CIC Toronto, I encourage you to join us to stay informed, engage, and also help advance Canada's place in the world. Please join me to welcome Alison for land acknowledgement.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending. Before we begin tonight's event, I would like to make a brief land acknowledgement. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the land and protect the territory. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I would now like to pass this on to Ms. Melanie Walker to begin the discussion. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, there we go. That's much better. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Alison and Mustafa. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Thanks to everybody for being here today on such a beautiful, sunny evening, and the fact that you're choosing to spend a few hours with us instead of in a park somewhere really means a lot. And you know, this as a topic is an incredibly important one generally, not just for independent media that are every day doing whatever they can to bring trusted, human-driven content to audiences to inform and engage, but also in the democratic system and ecosystem. Independent media is incredibly important as a pillar to support democracy, human rights. And I think we see, and we'll be talking about some of these examples about what happens when we don't have independent media able to serve as checks and balances on government, and also to inform the public, to serve as a platform for debate. We're going to get into that a little bit, but I want to start before I also introduce this wonderful panel that has come together this evening to share a few statistics. And as Mustafa said, yesterday was 3 May, World Press Freedom Day. It's a day to recognize independent media, to recognize fallen journalists, and to take account of where we are, take stock. There are a number of organizations that are recording statistics throughout the year, and the latest report produced by the organization RSF, Reporters Without Borders, Reporters Sans Frontières, came up with a very shocking report. We know that press freedom has been on the decline recently, but these stats for 2026 show that press freedom has hit an all-time low. It's the lowest it's been in 25 years. And the reasons for this are multiple: government oppression, financial crisis, disengagement of audience, legal and regulatory mechanisms to constrain and constrict free voices, harassment, the assault on journalists that happen in many parts of the world, those that are covering conflicts. And this really has been a terrible year. So a bad report card. And on top of that, there are a few more statistics that I'd like to share before getting into the first question for our panel. Maybe put your hand up if you already knew this. Some of this stuff was shocking to me. Today, as of 2025, we now have more than 72% of the world's population living in autocracies, non-democracies. This is the first time in 20 years autocracies now outnumber democracies. Global fear through foreign actors spreading disinformation to sow domestic division has hit an all-time high at 65%. This is in Canada. That fear has actually increased 12% since last year. So that fear of weaponized disinformation, misinformation. 57% of people surveyed globally, and this is through the Reuters Institute report that also puts out some very timely reports on the state of the media. 57% of people surveyed globally say it's getting harder to tell what is real and what is fake online. Again, I think probably most of us has fallen duped to some cute post or some crazy image that you think for a second, oh my goodness, is this real? Forward it along, and before you know it, you're an agent of misinformation. And social behavior and trust patterns are also increasingly disturbing. 73% of Canadians admit they're hesitant or unwilling to trust someone who is different from them. This has increased year over year. This is from the Edelman Trust Barometer report that just came out. 67% of young Canadians aged 18 to 34 believe hostile activism, online attacks, disinformation, even violence, is a legitimate tactic to express discontent. And this is something we'll also be digging in a little bit more. And Iman, Letitia, you have some great knowledge and stats around this. But a total of 57% of young Canadians are reportedly getting their views from social media, compared to 18% of boomers. This obviously is quite an issue when you have some of the major social media platforms entirely blocking news access from their platforms. And so that leaves the question, where on earth are young people in Canada getting their news? And we'll unpack that a bit. This panel really represents a fantastic array of expertise and insights operating in very different angles and components of a very large media ecosystem, both throughout Canada as well as internationally. And in no particular order, but it actually is perfect as you wind up just the way that I wanted to introduce you. I'll start with our first panelist, and that is Lutfola Najafizada. Am I saying it? Perfect. Is that all right? Thank you. Lutfola is the founder and CEO of Anu TV, a Washington, D.C.-based independent news channel broadcasting via satellite and digital platforms to Afghan audiences at home and abroad. He's served for more than a decade as the director of Tolo News TV, Afghanistan's largest news network, where he hosted the country's only televised presidential debate in 2019. I think you can all see where this is going. In 2024, Lutfola received the joint UK-Canada Press Freedom Award at the UN General Assembly on behalf of his fellow Afghan journalists. He was named Journalist of the Year by One Young World in 2022 and awarded the Press Freedom Hero Medal by Reporters Without Borders in 2016. He is a former fellow of the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago, the Asia Society, the Atlantic Council, and the World Press Institute. Welcome, Lutfola.
Thank you.
Second, we have Iman Kassam joining us. Iman is a journalist, professor, and researcher whose work blends frontline reporting with critical media scholarship. Working in newsrooms across the country, Iman's storytelling is shaped by years spent documenting land rights, governance, climate, and the lived realities of communities too often sidelined by legacy media. As a professor at Seneca Polytechnique, Iman teaches emerging journalists and media makers grounding production skills in conversations about ethics, representation, and the future of news. Their academic research focuses on Generation Z's trust in media, the credibility crisis facing Canadian journalism, and the growing threat of online harassment against journalists and scholars. Iman's work pushes for a more transparent, accountable, and community-rooted media landscape, and empowers young people to take up space as critical thinkers, storytellers, and agents of change. Welcome, Iman. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, John Hinds is the former president and CEO of NewsMedia Canada, where he represented the country's print and digital news publishers, national titles in community news on press freedom issues, journalism funding mechanisms, advertising regulation, and access to information reforms during a period of profound industry upheaval. He currently serves as chair, public member, of the National NewsMedia Council, Canada's self-regulatory body for print and digital journalism standards. He is a board member of the Canadian International Council and has previously served on the board of multiple Canadian institutions, the Ontario Trillium Foundation, United Way Toronto, the Harbourfront Centre, to name but a few. John, you're very welcome. So we're going to get into this, and because we are a smaller group, we really do encourage engagement and questions. We would like to have this to be very conversational. So if you're dying to get your word in before the actual question period, just put your hand up and we'll make space. I don't know if there's roving mics, but we are, again, quite close to each other, so you could just holler. We'll start with a few Q&As and then a few panel discussions that we have discussed, and then go into the Q&A portion. I wanted to start this panel with something that seems like a very straightforward question, but when you think about it, sometimes it's a little bit challenging to articulate. And I'm going to start with you, Ian, and that is, what is your definition of media freedom? What a good question. Am I using both with these microphones? You sound great.
I think, you talk about media freedom, such a big question, especially with people the tech industry and algorithms and platforms that shape our exposure. I think, from my perspective as a journalist, press freedom is the presence of conditions that allow for transparent, accountable, and truthful journalism to reach people in meaningful ways. We are wanting to talk about state control, about coercion, about retaliation towards journalists, but also about the side pressures that happen inside the newsroom, how stories get buried, decontextualized, prioritized for algorithms, or face ideological gatekeeping or political and economic pressures. Press freedom, media freedom is about protecting the information ecosystem, the integrity of the information ecosystem from all forms of power. Because a media, a press of the people, but the audit-built press, it can't evaluate, is not a full-free press. It's short.
I know, we'll get into it. Bifula.
Thank you. I think it's your ability and freedom to report truth and facts, opinions, and criticism without the fear of punishment, influence, and censorship. So the three principles facing three challenges probably seem simple, but given the statistics that you provided, 1 in 4 people in the world live in societies where some of these principles are respected, while 3 out of 4 is unfortunately not. So that is a very sort of high bar.
It's a high bar, and it's also, when you're trying to think about solutions, incredibly complex and challenging thing to think about how we start to dismantle, of which we'll get into, and at least get a start on it. John, again, you come at this from a different perspective and from an industry perspective, but you also have worked with so many media across Canada throughout the years and really understand a lot of the pressures faced by independent media as well as large media, legacy media, community media. How has that shaped your definition of media freedom?
Interesting. I totally agree with everything that's been said. And I think there's another almost that's at the individual side, the individual side, but it's that ecosystem. It's that creation of the pillar. We talk about before the state. And I think in order to have truly free and independent media, the fourth state has to and I use the word clunked, but it actually has to be able to stand up to the other actors in the ecosystem. Because if you have, you can have sort of the symbolic rights or the symbolic. You can have a free media, but if it can't do anything, it ends up being eroded, and I think it ends up being vulnerable. So I think part of the free expression, free media is to have that creation and the maintenance and the building up that ecosystem that allows the media to do its work within the context of the sort of individual, the rights-based organizations that we like and we want to support.
Thank you. And we're going to extremes, and it's impossible, I think, to talk about global press freedom and protection of independent media without looking at some of the incredibly challenging conditions that are in place in Afghanistan, the bravery of independent media who tried for many years to stay in the country, report in the country, needed to leave, those that have been murdered, others that have been silenced because of their gender and their views. And, if you could just share a little bit, Lutfullah, about your current assessment of the state of media freedom in Afghanistan, what brought you here, and a little bit too on why you have decided to set up shop in the US while living in Canada.
What brought me to Canada was the weather.
No one ever.
I think, given that this panel is happening at the backdrop of World Press Freedom Day, we should also recognize that it's very challenging for journalists to operate in today's world. Journalism is becoming a deadly profession. Last year, 129 journalists have been killed. And as we speak, I think 330 journalists are in jail around the world, with China, Iran, Israel, and Burma. Some of these are sort of the top jailers of journalists. Afghanistan too, I think right now we have about a dozen journalists in prison. Per capita speaking, that is one of the top countries where journalists are imprisoned. And the Taliban have arrested, harassed, tortured about 500 journalists and media professionals in the past 4.5 years, since they returned to power in 2021. So, and that, in a way, pushed us in a reactionary mode, sort of to not accept it as a norm, because our country was the deadliest country for journalists for 20 years, along with Syria and others. We lost over 100 journalists. I lost 11, 12 colleagues who were working immediately and closely with us. And with the return of the Taliban, I think we felt an extra layer of responsibility that we have to protect the cause that our colleagues gave their lives for. And we had 3 opportunities to grasp and operate around it. One, we had a vast network of journalists inside the country, and we're talking about thousands of journalists who are still there, who are still operating under different circumstances, but they're still there. That is not what you see in a lot of these closed spaces. Second opportunity is the culture in the society where people would like to speak up. Even in the Taliban's Afghanistan today, if you go to Kabul, you can get a vox pop after talking to every sort of third person. If you do it in Kazakhstan, probably after every 30th person. So that culture that an entire generation has grown up with press freedom, in the DNA, with sort of this value, it makes it extraordinary. Another testament to this fact is that we have a call-in show that about 6,000 people just call in just 1 hour. And this talks about basically a society that wants to scream, wants to engage, So that is another opportunity that we had in Afghanistan, which I think was and still is very unique. And then third, I think, was our ability to put information into the country, get information out, process it, put it back in. So our formula was very interesting. We sort of joined hands, those of us who were outside, we said, look, we have the freedom to report, and the journalists who are inside the country have the access on the ground. So when we combine access with freedom, then you can maintain the free flow of information. And with satellite broadcasting, about 19 million households in Afghanistan have access to satellite television. So that was pretty unique, and we have tapped on this for the past 3 years. And I believe that the exile media, the hybrid media, the diaspora media, including some of the local media inside the country as well, has pushed back the Taliban's narrative. That even if you go to, even in Afghanistan of today, the approval rating of the Taliban is only 15%.
Switching gears to Canada, and this is more a question around the regulation and some of the major, again, talking about the infrastructure and the major changes that Canada has seen in the past 5 years when it came to negotiating with big tech and coming to a solution that wouldn't strangle the legacy media at the time. And John, you were very much at the forefront of the negotiations and conversations being had both with the tech giants as well as lobbying the government and representing your membership base, which essentially was every print media across the country. And so diverse set of actors inside the organization as well, the association as well. That resulted in the Online News Act, which resulted in the complete ban of withdrawal of Meta, blocking from social media platforms, Instagram and Facebook, for anybody not aware of this, all news access. And it also resulted in a significant contribution by Google to create a fund to help support Canadian media. That's been very much a double-edged sword, of course, but really keen for, now that you're a little bit removed from this, having gone through that and maybe let it marinate, and with what's happened in Australia, which has taken a different model, would you look back and say that this was the best course of action, or would you do things the same way if you were to try to rewrite the last few years?
I'm not sure there's another way to do it. I think, the media landscape, the funding and media landscape has changed immensely, probably over the last 5 years. I mean, it used to, 5 years ago, I think we were all facing, certainly for legacy media, their demise. We now have significant government funding, and I find it ironic. When I first started in this business, the idea of media accepting government funding, whether it was through tax credits or direct subsidy, was an anathema. People were horrified about it, and now it probably makes up, a significant portion of the funding of most major media in the country, and smaller media in the country as well. The same goes for the money. The injection of funding for Google has been a lifeline to the industry. It's about $100 million a year. It's not perfect in terms of its allocation, and it's been an incredibly complicated process. I think the removal, or Meta's choice to remove itself or remove news from its feed, has been a real challenge for Canadians. I think we're all surprised at how, when we woke up to it, how many people were getting their news from Facebook. And they're not getting that now, and it's been replaced by non-news, essentially. So I think, if I were to be really honest, I think the Canadian news companies misplayed their hand on that. I think they invoked the legislation. And as soon as they invoked the legislation, Meta was like, we're not going to be regulated, we're out of here. Whereas I think the Australians, up until this week, were far smarter. They basically said, if Meta can agree to a funding formula to the industry, we will not invoke the legislation. And Meta have been doing that here. They had quite an advanced program of funding. It wasn't perfect, again, but it was there. It was providing support to particularly smaller media outlets across the country. And that disappeared. And with it, again, about $100 million in funding a year. So I would have said it, I wouldn't have invoked the act, I would have negotiated. I think that probably all changed, though, with the second Trump administration. Because even in the US, there were bills with the Senate to require Meta and Google to pay. And I think they had traction. Then Trump came in and he's made it part of his trade deal negotiations that we're supposed to get rid of the acts. And I think we're seeing that in Australia, where Meta has basically said, we are not going to redo our deal. So jury's out. We don't know whether that's a negotiating position or not, but that's a real problem for Australians, I think.
Do you think on the Canadian side that that condition as part of the trade negotiations would actually have legs?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think you could just see that big tech has cozied up to big Trump, and I think it's going to be a problem for us. The Google money could be at risk. Now, Google is slightly more vulnerable than Meta would be because it's not just the advertising side. There's so much of Google's product that goes into media and everything else. So there's a symbiotic relationship there, which in Meta's case there is. It's stricken the ad sales.
Turning now, Iman, to sort of internal pressures and structures. You've spent 2 decades in the media as a journalist, often covering issues and communities that are underserved. You've been quite bold in your coverage and brave in your stance, and you've written about publicly your decision to leave CTV Montreal as a result of some editorial interference. And I think as you've got obviously the extreme situation that you fellas talking about in Afghanistan, you've got the financial and sort of structural pressures on the other side. What does that look like when it's coming from inside the newsroom and that pressure is coming from either your direct line boss or the owner or the general organizational culture? Wow. What does that look like? I spent the majority of my career as like a street journalist. I went into the newsroom to have story meetings or to meet with my team or to do some editing, but for the most part, I was like a one-person show, the behind the camera, in front of the camera, videographer, the producer, the chase. And so often, stories get decontextualized, they get varied. A lot of these decisions of what makes the news, your daily news, are made at a news desk, and that's a small handful of people that make those decisions of what is the news agenda of the day. And so this doesn't come in the form of censorship orders, right? It's quiet and it's discreet. It's stories that are prioritized for the algorithm, or stories that are designed to not ruffle any feathers, or cheap stories, because we've had so many newsroom cuts in Canada that it's like, all right, go chase that ambulance. You know how many ambulances I have chased in my career, later in my career, not in the north, but in Montreal, a lot of ambulance chasing, because these are cheap stories to cover that don't require a lot of work when you're covering crime and when you're covering shootings. You turn on CP24 for those of you who live in Toronto, and that's all you see. It's all you see, and it's because you can send a journalist out there to cover crime, and you interview a police officer and you interview a concerned citizen. Oh my goodness, I can't believe this happened in my neighborhood. Oh my goodness, I might move now, I'm terrified. My kid goes to school just 17 blocks that way. And then we have the voice of a police officer that we treat as an official voice, as the truth, right? We don't treat them like we would a public interest group. We don't corroborate what they say. I have been lied to by the police countless times. Countless times. They have an exceptional PR department, right?
we all know the story of George Floyd. If it wasn't for that 17-year-old that filmed the whole incident, the world would never have known any better. And so like the threats to our press freedom here are so low. They're so like in our everyday newsrooms. And yeah, it comes as the cutting state funding. The Harvard government cut funding to my radio station that I worked at. Bell Media slashed funding to all its correspondent journalists, and they shut down newsrooms, radio stations across the country. We're seeing news deserts across the country. Yes, all of that exists here. We are seeing for the first time in Canada the RCMP protecting industry, oil and gas industry, instead of journalists and public interests. Instead of helping us journalists, or not even helping, allowing us journalists to hold truth to power, they are arresting us at the front lines. I think we also have to talk about who gets to make those decisions in the newsroom. Newsrooms in Canada are overwhelmingly white, male, older, and with a legacy understanding of objectivity and audiences. And we know this, we have the metrics. The CAJ, the Canadian Association of Journalists, tracks this every year. 78% of newsrooms are white. That's a problem. We can't talk about press freedom without talking about diversity. It is an integral part of press freedom. If the people making the decisions at your company, at the news company that is responsible for communicating to the public, don't represent the public, that press is only partially free. Thank you. You know, the kids, and I worked in a news network of 65 people, and I was the only person there that had intersecting identities, the only one. Do you know how much pressure that is on one person? And we face the beauty that we can bring to stories, the context that we can bring, the nuance that we can bring to stories. I walk into communities, into marginalized communities, not even my own, but other marginalized communities that I'm not a part of, and I have access, understanding, kinship, that I'm able to build trust faster and easier than my peers. I'm able to bring stories to the news team that are more developed, but also my ability to remain objective, fair and balanced is questioned all the time, not because of my journalism, but because of the way that I look. And so we also face harassment. We face doxing and online hate and bullying and harassment. I saw so much of it during the pandemic. And I would come back to the newsroom and be like, "Aye, Mom, that's just part of the job." As if this was my first time in the field. "Aye, Mom, that's just part of the job." It's not. The way that women, people of color, LGBTQ folks, gender, sexual, religious minorities, the way that we feel and face harassment is so different than other people. It is terrifying, it is personal, it is humiliating. And these newsrooms want us to all have public profiles and public faces, but don't have any of the policies in place. The anti-harassment policies in place to protect us. What do you do when you get harassed, when you face that harassment? What do you do when you have 50 people emailing you, telling you that they know where you live, and they hated your reporting, and they know where you live? Nothing. There's no policy for that. So what happens is attrition. We leave. Yeah, my short career, how many women, people of color, LGBTQ folks, Black, Brown, Indigenous journalists, incredible journalists I have seen leave, expert journalists that I've seen leave. And so they recruit some out of school, and the veterans leave. And then those new recruits get a taste of what this life is like, and then they leave. And then what's left? That's 78% that I referenced before. It's, I don't mean to sound so bleak, but it is a little bit. It is something we need to talk about more. How do you have press freedom when you have a newsroom that is so legacy? When those decision makers are so homogenous? How do we push conversations forward? How do we represent the public? How do we hold truth to power when we're arrested at the front lines? You know? It's devastating. And on that very side note is probably where I'll end. I have so much more to say.
No, and you raised so many salient points. I think, you know, and you and I have both spent a lot of time focusing on inclusivity in media, and my lens has always been international. And you know, you get this sense that things are better at home. Oh, it couldn't be like that in Canada. That's not, it's much more, we're much more progressive. I've had people talk to me, we're beyond gender, we're beyond color, and all you have to do is look at the stats and look at the leadership positions to see exactly what you're saying. The stats back up the lived experience that those power centers are well and firmly in place, and I think do a great disservice to the news media industry overall. And we're moving into the next question, because people do want to see themselves reflected in the news that they are consuming. They do want to see themselves reflected in the person who's delivering the news and who's writing, and the columns and the expertise. And so, the big, I suppose, the elephant in the room that is really coming across, I think, the minds and the desks of anybody who's working in this industry, but also anyone who is engaged in civic engagement, dialogue, and democracy, is youth. And engaging and communicating with young people across Canada. And so I'll start with you, Iman, on this, because you have done quite a lot of research on youth media consumption habits. And so I'll start with you to just frame it a little bit in terms of, where we are at when it comes to, I've raised that disturbing statistic of 57% of young people are getting their news and information from social media, and the fact that obviously a large number of media are blocked from that and is problematic. They're obviously turning to different sources. And so we'll start with you, and then I will add on a question to the gentleman from there. What's happening?
What is happening? I think, I want to be careful to not say that getting news on social media is a problem. It's not. We have to see the positives along with the negatives, right? Hear me out. I think if we can all agree that news has always been selected for us by the rich and powerful, from the printing press to news agendas of the day to the newspapers. It is always been up to governments and powerful people to decide for us what news we consume, what news is visible to us, right? So perhaps in some ways, social media can be seen as the most democratic form of news consumption we have ever had. It doesn't mean that all the information out there is good information, just like not all the information in a newspaper is good information, right? But we don't need powerful people to tell us who we are anymore. We don't need these people to tell us our stories anymore. Social media is a great tool for information. And what I've seen is that young people do use it for a lot of corroboration and verification. What they look for puts a lot of our old school traditional standards to the test. The big one was objectivity. Traditional journalism is built on this notion that women and people of color must be left out of the news and must be left out of the newsroom on the pretense that we are too close to our stories in order to tell them accurately. But what this generation and what my research shows is that they want information directly from the horse's mouth. They want LGBTQ news from LGBTQ people. And when that CBC reporter is reporting on trans issues in Alberta, they're like, fine, I don't necessarily distrust it. I don't know if this reporter has any proximity connection to the LGBTQ community, so I'm going to go to Extra News. I'm going to go to my favorite trans content creator to hear more about this. It's social media can be used as a balance to what's lacking in mainstream news coverage. In that lack of diversity, how are you going to get that perspective when you don't retain those people, right? We also talk about a dip in trust. And we've been doing this from Xers, millennials, to Gen Zers. We've seen a consistent decline in trust for the news. But we gauge trust, and the metrics of trust, we gauge it quantifiably, meaning, do you trust the news, yes or no? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you trust the news? We're not doing enough qualitative studies, right? What is trust? What does it mean to trust the news? What do you trust? What does it look like in an information ecosystem to trust? What's the difference between trust and credibility? So that's what my research was. I sat down with these youth, and one by one, we went through their social media, and I watched with them as they scrolled. Wait, stop. What do you trust? What do you not trust? Why aren't you reading this? Why are you reading this? What do you do now with this information? And what I learned is that they value transparency over polish. Just tell me not just what you know, but how do you know it? What did you ask, but what didn't you ask? What were your limitations? Obviously, news network, journalists, you have a 6 p.m. deadline, you had limitations. What were they? How was this decision made? You know, I love like the Walrus will publish all the names of the journalists, the producers, the visual team, and then a list of fact checkers. Why don't we do that on TV? Why isn't that standard? Why don't we do that everywhere? There's a level of transparency that would just be so easy. You know, people want to see, these young audiences want to see authenticity. It's okay to be wrong. Just be so straight up about it. Make it visible, your corrections and your mistakes. Misinformation is filling the gap left by disengagement. And that's what we're seeing, is that when people aren't getting what they want, they're disengaging. We've also seen news burnout, where they get completely overwhelmed by the amount of information. I was actually able to capture in real time a type of cognitive dissonance that was happening with these young people, when what they were watching and seeing on social media did not at all line up with what was happening in mainstream media. They were watching frontline coverage of horrific things that did not line up with the news of the day. And it hurt them on a physical level. It created a psychological cognitive dissonance. How do you come back from that? How does mainstream media come back from that? You know, like, have we completely lost that generation? So much harm has been done in that trust in just a handful of years. And this Gen Z is the first generation to grow up to be raised with virtually all the information in the world at their fingertips. Why would they trust one politician, one brand of news, one form of authority? Why would they? They weren't conditioned the way that I was as a millennial. I grew up loyal to CBC. I grew up, that is what I watched. That was the habit in the house. I grew up with the strong CRTC and strong CanCon regulations, right? Where like, no matter what news network or media system that you watched, your water cooler talk was all going to be the same. You know, you all watched the same shows. Whatever shows came from outside of Canada, like The Simpsons or Roxanne or whatever it was, you know, it was all syndicated and we all watched the same content. That is not it. We're in a Netflixification of our information system and our media system right now, right? So I don't think we can bring back the trust that has been lost. Not for Gen Z. I'm really interested to see what happens with Gen Alpha. But I think we've lost a lot with Gen Z. I just want to make sure. I wrote so many notes. So what what is the solution? I talk a lot about the doom and gloom of journalism. I'm sorry about that. But there's so many solutions or like ideals that maybe like mainstream traditional legacy journalism can adopt. Some of them are pipe dreams, some of them are impossible. So I tried to think of like real tangible things that they could do that are totally fully attainable, and we have models of them that are working, you know? So one is that I think we can design for verification. So not just consumption, but sourcing, evidence, limitations, making them more visible. To create formats for interaction and follow-up. And I know that some newsrooms have tried this, to create threads and have open threads on social media. I don't know if CBC is still banning comments on YouTube, but like, and on other things, right? But like, they've completely banned it. And my one question is, who made that decision? Not the people facing the harassment. I bet that, you know? I think we need to have more interaction with journalists online. There's an accountability. People want follow-ups because, again, that is what young people are getting on social media. We have to meet audiences where they're at. And the young audiences exist in a media ecosystem that has a lot of transparency and a lot of call-in, call-out culture, a lot of follow-up culture of stitches and responses. We need to create that for journalists. We can't just have journalists say the last word and close the comment section. That's not the way to reach this generation. And again, you know, just more diverse voices, not just as subjects, but as decision makers, because representation isn't just about fairness, it's about credibility. And so if legacy media doesn't get this right, the risk is not just losing an audience is losing the relevance in how truth is collectively understood.
So many points to follow up there, but I'm gonna come back to take this opportunity to and we can talk about this question further. So if you don't have the data to back it up, that's fine. I'm really curious talking about youth consumption, and Iman obviously has a significant repertoire of research and data from studies. What would you say, is similar or different about the youth in Afghanistan and the way that they're consuming news? And does it track what you're hearing? Just give us a little bit of insight into what your youngest demographic is doing and seeing and reacting when it comes to, engaging with you. I'm sure those 16 million. You probably have quite a few youngsters in the mix.
Yes, of course. Well, a couple of things. I was like, maybe we should just let Iman talk. I think to reflect on what she was saying, and then I'll relate it to the question you asked. Social media is also creating this bubble around you with algorithm, and they create parallel universe. I agree that there is no monopoly on information anymore, which is fantastic. But when you deal with a tsunami of information, and that is not processed, and that's not verified, as you said, then I think you are dealing with global chaos, which in a way we're dealing with. And I was talking to a colleague of mine earlier today, and we talked about a particular story that probably consumed all my time in the past 2-3 days. And he is sitting in a different continent, did not even know about it, and we're covering the same country. And that is also creating this bias in the editorial process. So when an editor decides what a story should be given coverage or not, probably it's not always the influence of sort of political views and opinions, but also their exposure to the kind of information they have. And I think that is very critical when it comes to sort of editorial decision making and your exposure to a lot of information which is out there. This is true that a lot of audience, in particular in social media, are the young people. Afghanistan has the youngest population in the world outside sub-Saharan Africa, with the median age being only 18. Two-thirds of our 40 million people are under 25. So we deal with a lot of sort of young and with particular Generation Z. And they are also very prone to sort of being radicalized, being influenced by the alternative narratives which are out there. So it's not just you who's sort of pumping information, others do it sometimes even in a more, much faster and probably more sophisticated way. So we prioritize satellite transmission, well, partially because of the reach, but of course social media as well. But social media and closed spaces are being censored, right? In Afghanistan, they have shut down TikTok, for instance. You can't download the app. People use VPN and filters, but not to great success all the time. So internet penetration is about 20%. It's very sort of urban centric, but for most of the ordinary people, I think it's still a very traditional way of consuming information. We asked the question of trust in a study a couple of years ago. We said, do you trust information coming out of mosque, your friend, social media, or mainstream media? in a relatively very traditional and conservative society. And social media and mainstream media sort of, was about 70 to 80% of how people consume information. Whether they trust that, I think this credibility issue is absolutely a different conversation.
Fascinating. And I just noticed the time. I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. This time together, it's just flown by. So we did promise that amidst all of our, rather depressing stats and views and statistics, that we would try to end on something constructive. And so I'm doing a 2-for-1 with you, John, because I was going to ask you, what is the legacy media getting wrong still about young people? So if you can, tie that into as well, what is one concrete action item that perhaps not the legacy media, perhaps it's a regulation issue, perhaps it's a educational issue, but what's one concrete action that can be taken to try to engage with young people and actually help to encourage that there is that uptick when it comes to readership or audience or listenership?
I think it all comes down to be a bit is literacy. I think at the end of the day, and I think we were talking, you had a great example of Owl Magazine having an article on spotting fake news. This is to deal with 9-year-olds. So, I mean, I guess it'd be the thing, because, to create that critical thought at an early age and to have, and I think where legacy media gets it wrong in a lot of cases is I think it builds on this stuff is people have to see themselves and they have to be able to trust. They, so much of I think legacy media in a way was really lazy because they always had the consumer. There was this idea that, if you grew up, kids did read the paper or kids did watch news. And then all of a sudden, if you had to get a job, you had paper. If you had to, so it was the only place to go. So you were kind of forced into the legacy news hole, if you want. And that just caught you, and then you got into it, and you wanted to buy a house or get a job or everything else, and that was the only place to go. And I don't think in a lot of ways, a lot of people running that have ever really been able to get beyond the fact that they didn't have a pipeline of consumers. And so, and again, when you're advertiser driven, when you're subscription driven, so people don't want to pay for news, and I think that's been a huge problem with generational change, is that there was a generation grew up that it was free, and it isn't free, so they didn't buy it. So Karen, I think those are the things, but I do think at the end of the day, creating a culture of media literacy is really the only way that we are ever going to be able to do that. And it impacts, again, that's the stuff, it impacts our democracy, it impacts our civil society, is that people can exercise critical thought in media.
Very well said. Iman, I'd like you to maybe, what gives you hope when you think about also one concrete thing that we can be thinking about to improve the overall situation, but what also gives you hope?
What gives me hope? Really?
Look through all your notes here.
You're gonna hate this, John. You're not gonna like this one. But you know what gives me hope is online journalists, content creators, citizen journalists. It is. I think it's and I think that is the future of news. It will be online, it will be fragmented and independent. I think what we need to do now as journalists, as adults, as educators, as parents, well, maybe I won't put that one on parents, but as journalists and educators, I think what we can do for journalism is help young people define what online journalism looks like, create an ethos, forms of accountability. We need to help citizen journalists differentiate themselves from the infotainment and from content creators. What makes a journalist? What, that you're with a news network? That you have a degree in journalism? I don't. what makes a journalist is probably how tethered they are to a news network. What makes somebody on TikTok a journalist? We need to figure that out, and I think we need to figure that out fast, because that is where young people are getting their information. That's where they're going to continue to get their information. If we want to teach media literacy, let's also arm them with a proper definition and help them develop their own ethos of what that looks like in this new media information.
That sounds to me like a yes and, not a direct contradiction to what Jen is saying. I think you're very well aligned. That's great, and you're absolutely, again, when it comes to actually defining, and I think we generally have a challenge defining what are those, what's the checklist that makes a content creator a journalist, and what are the sort of ethical standards and the editorial guidelines that they might be abiding by. And I think we'll get there, but there needs to also be an expanded definition of what that is to bring them into the tent.
And we have some really good ones in Canada, right? We do have some good ones in Canada. Adam Cole Not Cold is one of the first ones that comes to mind. But you take, a dozen of them and almost dissect what it is that they're doing. And we can even take American content creators for that and sort of dissect what they're doing. What is it? What's the commonality? What do we like so much about them? How can we make that a standard of online journalism? And I also think that, for the outlets that already exist, they need to make radical transparency and independent fact-checking a standard, not an exception.
Yeah. Yeah. Lufella with the last word. What gives you hope?
Well,
And
I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope, yes.
You must be an optimist. All you've been doing.
I am. But look, I think I can't emphasize enough on the importance of adequate editorial sort of oversight. I give you an example. In Afghanistan, we're dealing with a phenomena called the Talib Bros, right? So a lot of these YouTubers go to Afghanistan, young, from the West, and then they produce content that, this is the safest country in the world. Oh, I see women out there. And then they're watched by millions of people. It's really hard to justify that is a journalistic piece. And I think that's why we have to sort of come back to square one, where we talk about some of the not only ethical issues, but also legal issues. I think countries like Canada, they have to focus on the fact that there has to be investment, because if you can't just take whatever freedom which is there for granted. I am hopeful, number one, because of the interest of not only Generation Z, but the younger generation in general, in the news, information, and the amount of content which is being produced, and the engagement which is there. The question, I think the trick is how to sort of guide it, how to use it in a way that more useful content information is produced. And then second, there's a lot of people, in our case, our partner is the ordinary people, citizen journalists. We did not train 40 million journalists in Afghanistan, right? And then I questioned that, how lucky are we that, we got them all of a sudden? And they're all sending us information and content. And I think that is hope, that is fact, that is true commitment to sort of free press and free flow of information. And I see that in so many other contexts as well. Look at Iran, right? And also in Myanmar. They have a very successful partnership, similar to Afghanistan, where journalists are sitting in Thailand and Chiang Mai, and they are, partnering with network of journalists and citizen journalists inside the country. So yes, there are a lot of success stories I think we should not overlook. But when it comes to challenges, I think we have to come back to sort of the very fundamentals of what makes good journalism and talk about that. And I think this policy of isolation that Canada is safe, Norway is safe, this is not our problem, this is not in our part of the world, I think this is a flawed approach.
Well, and I think looking at it also from the question of survival and long-term survival, funding journalism, all of these content creators, the journalists that are going at it on their own, whether you're new media, online media, whatever platform you're on, the challenge of actually making money. And you want to pay your journalists, you want to be able to pay for valuable content. Editing stories takes time. It's incredibly important to have editors who can be running through content to be sure that what is going out into the system is actually verified. And I think that's a key aspect of independent news, is that editorial independence, that that when you are reading a story, that somebody has also vetted it and has served as fact-checking and has sources and all of these things, that takes time and that takes money. You can't only do that on your own, no matter how innovative you are as a content creator or as a citizen journalist. We're going to need to figure out as a society what value we place in news and information, and credible news and information.
I think I agree. I mean, USAID was sort of dissolved overnight, and they were also pumping about $100 million in journalism every year. Who has stepped in?
Yeah.
Right? EU, Canada, others in G7. I don't see it. So
no one has.
No one has, and it has affected a lot of small newsrooms around the world.
Yeah.
And in my country, last year, that about 70 to 80% of the small newsrooms, including many run by women, operate with an annual budget of less than $10,000.
Yeah.
Right? These are very small local radio stations and news operations, and there is sort of no ecosystem for them to support them.
Yeah. We've gone well past our, and at a time I was looking for Mustafa, but he never gave, oh, there you are. He never gave me the hook, but I think we do have some refreshments upstairs that we can continue the conversation. We won't take any more questions now as we have gone over. I do want to just say that Rachel Gilmore, maybe not that Rachel, but she has a book coming out in September that focuses very specifically on how to engage youth in the democratic process. Remember the name?
Renegade Politics.
Renegade Politics. So keep your eyes open. Hopefully we'll bring you back on stage for that. I want to thank my fantastic panelists. You each brought such an interesting aspect to the conversation, and I think it really goes to show how important it is to have cross-sector conversation and multiple perspectives, because we're not going to be able to solve any of these challenges in a silo. This does need to actually be a holistic collective approach as we move forward, and so thank you all for sharing your insights and observations and expertise. To the next time, thank you everyone for joining us. I think upstairs is where, or just up there, there's some snacks, so thank you to the audience for joining us today. And let's keep on the